Great to be joined today with Alia Eyers, all the way from Hong Kong. She is one of the women in our Disruptive City Women book, which is coming out very shortly through Movement Day, the global Movement Day scene. And she's passionate about disrupting, particularly the orphans in her city, and seeing every child be given a safe home. And you've done a lot of work around that, Alia, but great to have you with us today and have a bit of a chat.
Privileged to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Let me just read a bit of your bio before we start chatting. That just helps give people a context. Alia Eyers currently is the CEO of Mother's Choice, a local charity serving the many children without families and pregnant teenagers in Hong Kong. Alia leads a team of 150 to provide quality support services for children, youth, family in crisis, with the goal of seeing every child in a loving family. Before starting Mother's Choice, you were a corporate lawyer, and we might get onto that later. But born and raised in Hong Kong, you're a mother of 5, is it, or 6?
Now 6.
6. So we need to change that. You've had an extra one since the book came out, which is amazing. So you're clearly passionate about children, which is fantastic. So Alia, just give us a bit of an insight. What was it like growing up for you in Hong Kong?
I loved growing up in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a really unique city, incredibly diverse in many different ways. It's ethnically diverse, culturally diverse. There's people from all different backgrounds and sectors of society that live in a very small amount of space. And even within my own family, I have a pretty diverse background. My father is originally from India, and my mother is originally from the United States, but they both from Hong Kong, where they met each other and married. And I had the 7 of us kids. I'm the oldest of 7 children, and was born and raised here in Hong Kong, went to mostly British schools, and I had a very diverse experience growing up, and I really count it as a great privilege to grow up in a city like Hong Kong.
Yeah. Has that ever given you an identity crisis at all, or just because you're part of such a diverse society, it doesn't matter?
No, I think it does matter. And I think any third culture kid, and especially for mixed race kids, we all usually have our own identity journey. And I won't pretend that it's always been easy. I think each one of my siblings and I have kind of walked our own path in that way, but having to figure out really, who am I? Where am I from? Dreaded question for any mixed race or third culture kid. Where are you from? Almost impossible to answer without giving somebody a few hours and answer. I think as I've grown, I've learned to, what was really hard younger, not being able to answer with one city or one culture or one background, I now actually see as a real strength. And I think the other critical thing for me, and what I'm trying to raise my kids with, my husband's from Ireland, but grew up in East Africa. I try to raise my kids to really know that our identity, even though we might look different and have different experiences growing up, that my identity is really my character, my values, and what do I choose to align myself with, find success. How do I want to lead my life? So I've actually come to look at it as a strength, but when I was younger, I don't think I always saw it that way.
No. Well, no, we always see things differently as children. Did you, as growing up as a young girl, was it your passion to always be a lawyer? Was that one of your dreams as a little girl, or what did you hope to be growing up?
It's not that I wanted to be a lawyer when kid, but I was very moved by issues of social justice. And in fact, 4 out of the 7 of us are either lawyers or work in law firms or in the sort of related field. 2 from Hong Kong are do a lot of human rights work. They're barristers. You know, I think my parents and their very close friends, Gary and Helen Stevens, they who were working with the mission when I was a little kid, working with refugees, and they had come across this series of articles about hundreds of girls in our city who were going over the border to China for late-term backstreet abortion weekend. And, you know, actually they were just sort of 4 regular people in their 30s and 40s with a lot of little kids and just trying to make things work. But they had this something really unique in them, in that they had the courage to say, what can I do? And they birthed Mother's Choice 33 years ago. And I got to see my parents and all of their friends, our friends from church, our friends from school, my parents' friends from work, volunteer their time, their expertise, their resources, and seeing people do something, even however small, to get involved in issues of justice in our community. I think it really changed me. And I think that's the reason why so many of us got our education in law, because I do feel that the law is a critical part of doing work in justice. And for me, I was also I studied international affairs before I got my law degree, because I was also interested in how the law and how business can help build bridges between people and between cultures. So, yeah.
And I mean, what you've just talked about, people ask me a lot, how do they help their children not get sucked into the culture and go down the wrong path? And I think the best thing that we can do for parents, as parents for our children, is to bring our kids into a mission, into a cause bigger than themselves. My parents did. Your life is open up to other cultures, other issues, and you get out of your selfish world. So clearly it's shaped who you are, and I think it's just so vital that our young kids are given something bigger than themselves. So no, that's very interesting, Alia. So give us a bit of an idea. I mean, in the book, in your one chapter, you talk about the issue of homelessness, the foster care system, and you mentioned several times that it's really failing. The fact that it's a child, somebody who was 27 and a grandparent already. So in what ways is the system failing, do you see?
Well, I think the issues of teen pregnancy, of child abandonment, abuse, and neglect, of huge waiting lists for foster care and residential care placements, it's not unique in the world. And in fact, I was talking about growing up in Hong Kong, and most times when people hear that I'm from Hong Kong, they picture our glittering, beautiful sky.
That's it.
And they know that we have some of the wealthiest people in the world live in our city, and all of that is true. Hong Kong is beautiful. Hong Kong has some of the wealthiest people in the world, but there is another side, and I think this other side is true of every side in the world. Nobody escapes. And this dark side that I'm talking about, that connects all these issues, is something I like to call the vicious cycle. And the vicious cycle it's something that's intergenerational. I believe that it destroys lives and breaks families and ultimately ruins cities. And let me just explain what I mean by this cycle that's at play. When you have an unprepared family that doesn't have the support that they need from the community around them, and I'll tell you this, every family on the planet, nobody escapes tragedy or hardship. Doesn't matter how much money you have. Everybody experiences trauma, tragedy, and hardship. But if you are an unprepared family, you do not have a network of support around you, your children will end up either in the formal or informal care system, depending on what city you live in. And once children get into the residential system, they get stuck. In Hong Kong, we have about 4,000 children living in full-time institutionalized care from newborn to 18 years old. On any given day, there's 400 to 600 kids on the wait list. And quite frankly, there's tens of thousands more kids that need placements. We just don't have the bed space for them. Most of those kids, almost half of those kids, will stay the rest of their lives until they're 18 in care. Okay, never experiencing the love of a family. The other half will spend years in care, those formative years when you need a family. And all of those children are going to experience physical, emotional, or mental trauma. So when children grow up without a family around them experiencing those kinds of traumas, they become young people who face incarceration. They're very likely, especially if they're a boy, to go to prison. They leave school early. which means they have limited employment opportunities as they get older. And if they're a girl, they're astronomically more likely to get pregnant between the ages of 12 and 18. Now, they become teenagers who are parents who don't have the support network that they need to care for their child.
Yeah.
And their child goes into the system, and all the while, the community, and we all need community to support us in the journey of parenting, the community around us remains, I think, either unaware or ill-informed about how to respond to the cycle. And then that cycle continues for generations and can ultimately lead to really kind of ruin of the city.
Yeah.
So everything that we do at Mother's Choice, we actually have 7 services working with children that don't have families, youth who are experiencing pregnancy or at risk of pregnancy, families, adoptive families, birth families, foster families, and then equipping our community through child protection training and other training. We also just see that if everything we work towards needs to be aiming at children and families, because it is possible to break the cycle, right? And the answer to breaking that cycle is a family.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's good to know there's an answer. I mean, you and your team are doing a great job, but, you know, there's a lot of churches in Hong Kong.
Yep.
Are they addressing this issue, or is it something they just prefer not to know about, or what do you find?
You know, I do think that we have the answer within the church, right?
Yeah.
Children need families, and families need support. I mean, the biggest problem for these families who are struggling and end up placing their children removed from them is social isolation, right? They don't have authentic connection and extended family relationships, people who can support them when they're going through a hard time. And I always say the biggest resource that the church has, no matter how much money a church has in its bank account, the biggest resource we have is community.
Yeah.
And the fact is, the Bible calls us to practice compassionate and, I believe, radical hospitality, right? So if you just have to read the Bible, and it was just Pentecost, you know, thinking about the early church in Acts, I mean, they practiced radical hospitality in how they cared for the vulnerable amongst them. And I think that kind of radical countercultural hospitality for strangers is really should be the foundational ministry of the church. And I think it was actually the vehicle for the spread of the gospel, the good news that Jesus loved.
Absolutely.
So, you know, I think, you know, the church has gone wrong over the generations and starting to build different homes for vulnerable children, like orphanages, rather than thinking about how do we welcome children into our own homes? How do we welcome a struggling teenager who's pregnant, who's experienced trauma in life? How do we welcome her in friendship and not rejection and shame? You know, but I think a lot can happen in the context of authentic relationship when we truly love the vulnerable. But I think there's some key barriers to the church and really walking out what I think is our biblical calling.
Yeah.
I think the short answer is fear. Fear is what holds us back. I think we're afraid, what if I open my home to a struggling child or vulnerable teenager? You know, what if they come and steal from me?
Exactly.
You know, if I open my home, and this is especially true in Hong Kong, when we live in very small apartments, flats, I'll have even less space than I have now. Or, you know, that thought that my home is my safe haven, it's where I rest, so I need to have everything in perfect order in my home. Or what if, and this is the one I hear the most, you know, what if I open my heart to a child, and then I love them, and they leave me because they're reunited with their, then they get adopted. So I think those are kind of the key fears or doubts that really hold people back.
Yeah, they are. We've got a great woman in our city who's a big advocate for people taking in children into their homes, and she says, essentially, I'm asking you to suffer, which is the message of the cross. You know, she used to try and sell a nice message of feeling good and helping a kid, but she's stopped doing that because you're asking one to suffer, and there's no easy way around it, is there? Look, we finish this. I mean, we could talk all day. People have to the book. I mean, what you're doing, running a mother's choice, you know, there's always a cost to being disruptive, to coming up against these systemic issues that have plagued our cities for hundreds of years. What is your biggest challenge? What are some of the hurdles you've had to face?
I think there's two big challenges that we face. The first is really finances, and I think it's hard for people to get their head around teen pregnancy and children with special families, adoption, foster care, the messiness of intergenerational trauma in families. Sometimes it's easier either to blame them for their situation or to not think about it. And so there's this kind of, well, the government will take care of it, or somebody else will take care of it, or if I support one of these young women, you know, I'm just facilitating her life choices, you know. So it's actually really challenging, especially when, you know, these are things that are quite taboo topics in our culture, and especially in our church culture. You know, it's hard for us to get the funding that we need to keep our doors open, and especially now with the global pandemic, you know, not being very limited in our ability to host larger events. But I think the second big challenge for us is really that people don't want to talk about the issue. I actually, you know, sometimes when I talk about these underlying issues of injustice in our city, people get angry, and rightly so. But they get angry with our community for not stepping up. And I think part of I actually believe that most people are pretty generous and are kind and want to help. I think the big challenge is that people just don't know. Maybe they've never been a pregnant teenager. They don't realize they've never been a pregnant teenager. They don't know anybody with special needs. They don't know anybody who's fostered. They can't imagine how this could happen in a family. And I think one way we really can change these issues in our cities is not only by you know, supporting organizations that are really giving another choice to young women who are pregnant, and walking alongside them, who are making sure that children are growing up in families. But I think it's not just financial resources, it's just using our mouth. You know, when we give a platform in our churches and our workplace and our communities to talk about these issues, I think people are moved. You know, we're an 80% volunteer organization. When I see people say, I may not have money, but I have this one small thing, I have this skill, I have this. When people bring what they have, actually we can have outsized impacts, right? So I think just talking about it and telling the stories, or just researching and learning more about what's happening in your own city, you'll be surprised the difference that you can make.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. It'd be great to talk so much longer, but it's good just to get your heart and passion and hear a bit more of the behind the story of what you do. But we really want to encourage people to read the book, not just Alia's story, but all the other women. What I love is that these women have seen a problem in their city and not been idle bystanders, but they've said we can do something, which is usually walking into the impossible. But I find that women are so courageous and ready to take those mountains, and that's been you, Alia. So bless you and your 6 children and your family and all the other children you're helping in Hong Kong. Thank you for your time.